I stepped into our company's office just like I did every morning, my heels tapping against the tiled floor, my mind already running through the day's tasks. But this time something felt off. There was a strange hush in the air. As soon as I rounded the corner into the main workspace, my entire world tilted. My husband, no, the man I thought I knew, stood in the center of the room, his arm wrapped around the waist of another woman. She was young, sleek, polished, with a kind of purposeful confidence that made me instantly wary. Her glossy auburn hair brushed her shoulders, and her sharp green eyes flicked around like she owned the place. Next to her stood Austin Coleman, my husband and co-founder of our consulting firm, Coleman & Gray. He offered the crowd a smug smile and said, in the same commanding tone he used during board presentations, "Everyone meet Sasha. She'll be taking Vanessa's position." A ripple of shock passed through the office. Heads turned toward me, eyes wide, jaws tightening. I gripped my coffee cup so hard I thought it might shatter. My stomach clenched, and heat rose to my cheeks. But I refused to show any crack in my composure. Instead, I drew a slow breath, keeping my spine rigid. My gaze flicked to Austin, and I searched his face for some flicker of regret, or even hesitation, some sign this was a cruel joke, or that he felt the slightest twinge of guilt. Nothing. Just cool, calculating detachment. "Vanessa," he went on, that confident lilt still in his voice, "would you mind helping Sasha get settled? She'll need all your files and account details." It was like a punch to the gut. Here he was, talking as if I had no significance, instructing me to hand over my life's work to this stranger. Kept my voice steady. "Of course," I said, forcing a polite smile that tasted bitter on my tongue. "I'll make sure she has everything she needs." Austin's dark eyes gleamed with a flicker of satisfaction. Sasha's glossy lips curved into a triumphant little smile, as though she'd just claimed a crown. She brushed an imaginary piece of lint from her blouse, then turned her full attention to him. They walked off together toward the executive corner offices, the ones Austin and I used to share. My heart hammered, and I didn't dare let myself blink too fast, for fear tears might slip out. Not here. Not in front of these people. I set my coffee cup down on a nearby desk and forced myself to walk away. If I stayed, I might say or do something I'd regret. It was a moment that split my life in two. Before this and after this. Before, I was Vanessa Coleman, co-founder, partner, and wife of Austin Coleman. A woman whose opinion mattered, who had helped build this entire operation from scratch. Now, I was the woman who'd just been replaced. I managed to make it down the hallway to my small private office, an office that had grown more cramped as our company expanded. Maybe that was the first sign. Austin had insisted on a bigger, flashier corner space for himself, citing the need for executive presence. I'd swallowed the sting of that at the time, figuring it was just part of growth. But now, I could see how the seeds of his betrayal had been planted long ago. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it, breath catching in my throat. My gaze caught on the framed photos. Me and Austin signing the lease to our first building, celebrating after our first major contract. So many memories. So many years building a dream that was supposed to be ours. I remembered the early days, living on takeout and almost no sleep, drafting proposals at 3 in the morning while Austin and I huddled over a shared laptop. We were unstoppable. Or so I'd believed. But the signs of trouble had been creeping in. His late nights, his dismissive tones, the new cologne that clung to his shirts when he came home at odd hours. Every part of me had wanted to ignore the truth, to cling to the hope that it was just stress, that maybe I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Because now, he'd flaunted his new flame in front of everyone, proclaiming that she'd be taking my position. My entire world was cracking at the seams. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If Austin thought I'd silently slink away, humiliated, he was sorely mistaken. It had all started months ago with little hints I tried to push aside. Austin coming home late, claiming he was bogged down in negotiations. At first I believed him. After all, we were in the midst of some major expansions. But then came the hushed phone calls in the kitchen at odd hours, the lunches he claimed to have with potential clients, yet never could provide a name. I'd find random receipts in his pockets for dinners that cost more than any business meal we'd ever had together. And the perfume. That cloying, unfamiliar scent. He said it was just from a client's hug, or some store sample. Lies stacked like tinder, waiting for a spark. One Tuesday afternoon, I took him the final copy of a proposal we were about to pitch to a huge client. His office door was slightly ajar, and as I raised my hand to knock, I heard his voice, low and warm, almost intimate. "Sasha, I can't wait for tomorrow's lunch. Same place." A soft laugh from a woman followed. "Wouldn't miss it," she purred. "You know I never say no to you." My heart galloped. My hands felt clammy around the folder I was holding. That name. I stepped back, swallowed, tried to convince myself it was just a business associate. But the next morning I spotted a reservation on our shared scheduling app. For two at a high-end restaurant, the same one Austin and I used to go to on every anniversary. The name on the reservation was Sasha's, not his. That night, when he came in close to midnight, I confronted him. "Another meeting?" I asked in my calmest voice. He tossed his keys on the table without even glancing at me. "Yeah. It ran late." "With whom?" He sighed, rolling his eyes. "You want a full itinerary, Vanessa? I can't be reporting every little detail of my day." I fought the urge to scream, to cry, to demand he explain. But something in his tone, so dismissive, made me hold back. Instead, I simply watched as he headed to the bedroom to take a shower. The conversation ended before it began. Later I tried to talk about our future, about the changes at the company, but he brushed me off. That hurt more than anything. It was as if I no longer existed in his plans. And then came the day he walked in with Sasha, announcing she'd take my role. The final blow. Hours after that fiasco in the office, I waited until Austin left for one of his late meetings. A grim determination had replaced my heartbreak. I followed him in my car, keeping the headlights low, trailing a few cars behind. My pulse hammered with every turn. Eventually, he pulled into the Lancaster Hotel, a sleek glass structure downtown known for its exclusive clientele and discreet staff. Austin stepped out of his car, checking his phone, straightening his tie. A minute later, Sasha joined him from a separate vehicle. They disappeared inside together. I didn't try to follow them up to the room. There was no need. I had my confirmation. My chest tightened, but I refused to cry. Instead, I drove home in a haze, parked in our driveway, and entered the house that suddenly felt like a stranger's. Our wedding photos hung on the wall, mocking me. In the bedroom, I stared at the perfectly made bed we used to share. I stepped forward, picked up a framed photo, me beaming in white, him in a crisp tux, our foreheads touching as if we were in our own perfect world. I hurled that frame against the opposite wall with a harsh cry, glass shattering. The sound rang in my ears. I expected tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, a cold, calm fury seeped into my veins. I was done playing the fool. He crept in at dawn, the smell of Sasha's perfume all over him. I was sitting in the living room, fully dressed, waiting like a statue. When he stepped through the door, he didn't even flinch, just tossed his keys aside. "Morning," he said, his tone gruff. "Morning," I echoed, sipping coffee with a forced smile. He glanced at me warily. "You're up early." Shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Busy day ahead." My voice gave nothing away. He exhaled, nodded, and headed to the bedroom. He didn't bother offering an explanation, apology, or even a lie. Because in his mind, I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't fight back. Won't. The next day at the office, I noticed Sasha had actually settled at my desk. All my personal belongings were tucked to the side in a box, as if I'd already been dismissed. She strutted around, talking to employees, acting as if she'd been there for years. Austin hovered near her, occasionally touching her shoulder, leaning in as they talked. They were so brazen, I half expected a public display of affection. I tried to keep my composure. One of my co-workers, Brooke, sidled up to me and whispered, "This is insane. You can't let them get away with it." I forced a faint smile. I have no intention of letting them get away with anything. Sasha soon made her way over, giving me a faux sympathetic smile. "Vanessa, could you be a dear and forward all those contract details to me? I'll need them to, take over your responsibilities." The audacity was staggering. But I simply arched a brow. "Of course," I replied. "I'll get right on that." From across the room I felt Austin watching. He'd been quietly observing my every move, probably expecting me to cause a scene. Instead I was composed. Because what he didn't know was that I had already made copies of key documents, carefully noting suspicious transactions and questionable expenses. I suspected him of redirecting company funds for personal indulgences, including those hotel stays with Sasha. I couldn't just blow this up with raw accusations. I needed to do this right, gather the evidence, then strike with precision. That night, I got home to find official papers waiting on the kitchen counter. Divorce papers, filed and already signed by Austin. No note attached. No explanation beyond the legal jargon that spelled out the dissolution of our marriage. My chest constricted, but I swallowed hard and picked them up. So it was official. He was casting me aside just like that. I read through the details. He offered to let me keep some minor assets, a sum of money, but he planned to keep the house, the lion's share of our joint savings, and most critically, the company. My fury smoldered. Fine. Let him think I would quietly sign and vanish. The next morning he approached me in my office, what was left of it, holding an envelope. "We should talk," he said, his voice tight. I nodded, gesturing for him to close the door. He put the envelope on the desk. "I'd like you to sign these papers. The sooner we finalize this, the sooner we can both move on." I stared at him, searching for any hint of the man I married. But that man no longer existed. "Okay," I replied softly. He looked a little surprised, as though he'd expected me to rail at him. I opened the envelope, scanned the lines. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. My name printed in neat, impersonal text. I picked up a pen, wrote my signature. My hand only shook slightly. Then I handed the papers back. "There," I said, forcing my lips into a thin smile. "Now you're free to be with Sasha without any pesky obstacles." Austin's eyes flickered. Maybe he expected a fight or tears or screaming. Instead I was calm. He cleared his throat. "It's for the best," he muttered. "We were too different." I said nothing. He lingered a moment as though he might say more. Then he turned and left. He assumed that was the end of it. But it wasn't. I still had one card left to play. The evidence of his misdeeds in the company. Let him think he'd won on a personal level. Professionally, he was about to lose far more. Only a couple of days later, I received an urgent email from Brooke. Subject line: Red ASAP Big Trouble. She'd attached internal reports, highlighting suspicious patterns. Invoice inflation, misallocated funds, client dissatisfaction. It all painted a picture of chaos. Apparently, since Austin sidelined me, clients started pulling out, employees felt betrayed, and new leadership under Sasha was incompetent at best, malicious at worst. Called Brooke. "Tell me everything," I said. Her voice tumbled out, rapid, frustrated. "Vanessa, it's bad. Clients don't trust them. Projects are behind schedule. Sasha keeps rearranging teams. People are leaving in droves. And we found documents showing that Austin's been expensing personal stuff to the company." A grim satisfaction stirred inside me. He was lighting the company on fire. "Brooke, send everything you have to me," I said. "Don't mention my name to them yet. We'll handle this carefully." And handle it we did. Within a week, the board of directors, led by Austin's father Lionel, who had founded the firm, called a special meeting. They demanded that I attend, not as an employee but as a key witness. They knew I had the inside knowledge to explain the meltdown. I arrived at the office early, wearing a crisp black suit, determination thrumming in my veins. I nodded to a few sympathetic employees who offered supportive looks. In the big conference room, Lionel sat at the head of the long table, his gaze grim. Around him, board members studied thick binders of documentation. At the far end of the table, Austin and Sasha sat side by side. Sasha's posture was stiff, her eyes flicking around nervously. Austin wore a mask of controlled cool, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. As soon as the meeting started, Lionel cleared his throat. "We've heard troubling reports about the direction of Coleman and Gray. Before we proceed, we'd like to hear from Vanessa." He inclined his head toward me, and I rose to speak. My pulse fluttered, but I kept my expression poised. I laid out the facts. "In these documents, you'll see patterns of financial misuse. Personal expenses billed to company accounts. Unauthorized reassignments of key personnel that led to project failures. Clients have cited a lack of trust in the current leadership." I slid folders across to each board member. "You'll see the details in black and white." A hush fell as they flipped through the evidence. One older board member, known for his stern approach, let out a soft whistle under his breath. "This is worse than I anticipated," he muttered. Sasha tried to speak up. "I've been implementing changes to modernize." Lionel pinned her with a glare. "Changes that have cost us 3 major clients in 2 months. He turned toward Austin. "I gave you control, son, trusting that you and Vanessa would guide this company to new heights. Instead, you cut her out and brought in." He waved a dismissive hand at Sasha. "Someone who apparently lacks the necessary experience. The results speak for themselves." Austin's face flushed, but he tried to maintain composure. "Father, I had a vision for a new direction. Vanessa was stuck in old ways. We needed fresh ideas." Lionel's knuckles whitened. "Don't insult me. This fiasco has nothing to do with fresh ideas and everything to do with your arrogance." Then he flipped to the last section of my documents, scanning the line items of hotel stays, lavish dinners, spa services, all billed to the company's corporate account. His mouth tightened. "I assume you have an explanation for these," he said icily, looking at Austin. Austin opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sasha's eyes darted to him, panic flickering. She hadn't realized he used corporate funds for personal luxuries, too. The air crackled with tension. One by one, the board members declared their disappointment and anger. The vote was swift and unanimous. Austin was removed from his leadership role, effective immediately. Sasha was likewise dismissed from her consultant position. Security was called to escort them out if necessary. Austin gathered his papers, glancing at me with a look that straddled fury and regret. As we all made our way toward the exit, he spun on his heel, facing me in the reception area. "You think you've won?" he hissed, voice trembling. I stared at him, my face calm. "I didn't do this to win, Austin. I did it so you'd face the consequences of your actions." His jaw worked like he wanted to retort but couldn't find the words. Sasha hovered a few steps away, rummaging in her purse, face pale. She refused to meet my eyes. With that, they left, stepping out onto the street as the doors closed behind them. I watched them go, feeling no joy, just an overwhelming sense of relief. Removing Austin was only the beginning. The board, led by Lionel, asked me to return. "You helped build this place," Lionel said. "We need you to stabilize it." But I no longer wanted the old dream. It was tainted. I politely declined, explaining that I'd rather start something new. Lionel looked both sad and resigned, but he understood. In that moment, I felt a strange swell of affection for him. He'd been a decent mentor once, and it wasn't his fault his son turned out this way. I spent the next few weeks planning my own venture. A smaller consulting firm, one that specialized in helping companies avoid exactly the kind of meltdown Austin had created. Call it irony or perhaps justice. I leased a bright, modern office space in a part of the city known for startups. Brooke joined me without hesitation, along with a few other loyal employees who believed in my vision. Within a month, we had more clients than we could handle. The business scene had watched the scandal unfold, and ironically, that made me something of a trusted figure. People admired that I'd calmly exposed wrongdoing and upheld integrity. It was a reputation I was proud to own. Meanwhile, rumor had it that Austin tried to form a new enterprise, seeking investors at second-rate events. But his name was tarnished. He hadn't just burned bridges. He'd dropped a bomb on them. Without the support of Lionel or the credibility of the old firm, potential backers wanted nothing to do with him. Sasha disappeared. Some said she left him the moment she realized his money was gone. Others said she was never that invested in him beyond the power and the lifestyle. Either way, I tried not to dwell on it. My days were consumed by building something fresh, forging new partnerships, and even traveling for conferences. The old hurt receded, replaced by a sense of purpose. If I caught a glimpse of Austin in a trade journal or business article, I'd read it with a sort of detached curiosity. He was a cautionary tale, an example of how hubris and betrayal could unravel success. Months later, I attended a high-profile charity gala, the same one Austin and I used to go to every year, back when we were the golden couple of the business world. This time I arrived alone, driving my own car, stepping out in a simple but elegant black dress. Heads turned. My new firm was doing well, and I'd gained a bit of notoriety after everything. I made small talk with other attendees, feeling more in control and confident than I ever had before. Across the room, near the bar, I saw a familiar figure. Austin was sipping something amber-colored, shoulders slumped, hair disheveled in a way that suggested he'd given up trying to impress. For a moment, his gaze locked onto mine. I debated ignoring him, but he approached me tentatively. "Vanessa," he said quietly. "You look incredible." I allowed a faint smile, not unkind but not warm. "Thank you." He shifted from foot to foot, clearing his throat. I just wanted to say." His voice trailed off, shame flickering in his eyes. "I made mistakes," he managed. "Big ones. I guess I just wanted to say sorry." Something in me had expected this. Yet hearing it from him in person, seeing how far he'd fallen, stirred no malice. Just a calm acceptance. He nodded. "I appreciate that," I replied. "But I don't need an apology. I'm doing fine." He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I can see that," he murmured. "You always were the smarter one." He gave a rueful laugh, though no humor reached his eyes. Then he extended a hand, almost as if he wanted to clasp mine. I didn't move. "Austin," I said, my voice gentle, "I truly hope you learn from what happened. But I've moved on." He let his hand drop, nodding slowly. "Take care," he mumbled. Then he turned and drifted back through the crowd, a lonely figure in a room of sparkling laughter. As I stood there, I felt no hatred, no regret. I took a slow breath, the weight of the past lifting. Maybe he did feel remorse now that he'd faced the consequences. Maybe not. But it no longer mattered to me. That night after the gala, I returned to my own apartment, a bright, modern space overlooking the city. I'd sold the house Austin and I once shared, not wanting the ghosts of that life to linger. Standing on my balcony, the wind ruffled my hair, and the skyline twinkled with possibilities. I wrapped my arms around myself and thought back to how small and crushed I'd felt that morning he introduced Sasha to the entire firm. I smiled to myself, a real smile, free of bitterness. I had survived. More than that, I'd flourished. Without him, I'd found my own footing and discovered strengths I never knew I had. My new company was thriving, and I was forging new friendships, new goals, a new future. And I felt a sense of quiet triumph that had nothing to do with seeing Austin suffer. It was about knowing I was no longer tied to someone who demeaned me. I stepped back inside, made a cup of tea, and scrolled through messages from my team about upcoming client pitches. My phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. "Conference next week, can you keynote? Everyone wants to hear your story." My lips curved. I typed back quickly. Absolutely. Let's show them what we can do. As I lay down that night, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about standing on your own 2 feet, living well, and watching the other person realize they have no power over you anymore. That was exactly how I felt. Powerful, confident, at peace. In the days that followed, I refined my company's mission statement, focusing on ethical leadership, transparency, and innovative consulting solutions. We brought on more staff, people who believed in the same values. We tackled complex corporate restructuring cases, helping other companies avoid the toxic pitfalls Austin had fallen into. If that wasn't poetic justice, I didn't know what was. Looking back, I sometimes wondered what might have happened if Austin hadn't met Sasha, if he hadn't let ambition and arrogance consume him. Perhaps we could have remained partners, building Coleman and Gray into a powerhouse together. But that life was a dream, shattered by his choices long before I ever discovered them. People ask me if I'd do things differently. Perhaps. But I'm not sure I'd change the outcome. Because through the pain, I found a version of myself that was stronger, more capable, and more fearless. Austin forced me to look at who I was when everything was stripped away. And what I discovered was a woman who refused to be erased. Sometimes I still get asked for my take on the scandal, especially when clients or interviews bring up my background. I give a measured response. I had a business partner who lost sight of our core values. I recognized what was happening and took steps to correct it. Then I moved on and started fresh. That's all anyone needs to know. The rest is just unnecessary detail. Of course, there are still nights when I recall the sting of walking into our firm that fateful morning, seeing Austin with Sasha wrapped around him, proclaiming her as my replacement. But time has softened the edges of that memory, turning it from a raw wound into a stepping stone. The humiliation, the betrayal, it's all part of my story now, a reminder of how far I've come and how I refuse to let another person define my worth. Now, I stand as CEO of my own consultancy, charting a path that's mine alone. The employees who work under me respect me. My clients trust me. And while the echoes of the past sometimes whisper in my ear, I know I'm where I'm meant to be. One day maybe I'll meet someone new, someone who respects my independence and intelligence. But for now, I'm content building what I've started, forging ahead with my vision. On a crisp, sunny morning months later, I prepared for a major presentation at a corporate summit. Ironically, it was being held at the same hotel, the Lancaster, where I once trailed Austin to catch him meeting Sasha. This time, I walked through those shining glass doors with my head high, clutching a leather portfolio filled with my own success stories. No ghost of heartbreak lingered. Only purpose. As I stepped into the conference hall, staff greeted me politely. Someone escorted me to a podium set up in a room thrumming with conversation. Executives, entrepreneurs, and innovators mingled. My session was titled Rebuilding with Integrity, focusing on how companies could pivot after leadership crises. People wanted to hear from me because they knew I'd been through the fire. I had come out the other side stronger. I took a steadying breath, stepping behind the podium. Then I began speaking about the importance of honesty, accountability, the danger of letting ego run the show. The audience leaned in, nodding, scribbling notes. Some shot me curious glances, aware of my personal backstory but too polite to mention it. I'd never felt more in my element. Finishing with a flourish, I received enthusiastic applause. I stood there, smiling, letting that moment wash over me. Afterward, a handful of people gathered around for questions. One man, his expression earnest, asked quietly, "Vanessa, how did you manage to keep going when everything collapsed? Doesn't betrayal leave scars that never heal?" Paused, considering. "It does leave scars," I said softly. "But scars can remind you of your strength. You can let them define you, or you can use them to grow into someone who knows their worth." I chose the latter. He nodded, thanking me. I shook a few more hands, then slipped out of the crowded hall into a quieter corner by a window overlooking the city. For a moment, I let my mind wander, thinking back to the day Austin humiliated me. The day I thought my world ended. And here I was, living a life that felt freer, more authentic, more grounded than I ever could have imagined. From behind me, I heard a familiar voice. "Ms. Coleman, that was quite a speech." I turned, half expecting to see Austin. Instead, it was an old colleague from Coleman and Gray, a man named Dominic. He'd left shortly after I did, citing disagreements with Austin's leadership style. "Thank you," I replied. He gave me a nod of respect. "What you said resonated with a lot of folks here. There are more stories like yours than you'd think. Leaders forgetting the people who built the company with them. I'm glad you exposed it and moved on." I nodded in agreement. "I'm just grateful I had the chance to rebuild. Not everyone does." He offered a small, understanding smile. Then we parted ways, and I left the Lancaster Hotel. As the doors shut behind me, I felt no twinge of pain, just a sense of accomplishment and a calm acceptance of the past. That evening, back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine, set my phone to silent, and curled up with a book. My cat Pippa hopped onto my lap. The city lights twinkled outside, reflected in the glass walls. My mind drifted, replaying how drastically my life had changed over the last year, how heartbreak led me to discover a deeper resilience than I'd ever known. My phone buzzed with a single notification. I glanced down, recognizing the name of a journalist who had once interviewed me. The message read, "Vanessa, any comment on the rumors that Austin Coleman is declaring bankruptcy?" I exhaled, feeling a dull pang of sadness that it had come to that for him. But no, I had no comment. I deleted the message. Some might say I should relish his downfall. Maybe a part of me once longed for vengeance. But real revenge, I realized, lay in living well and letting go of the pain he'd inflicted. I'd left him behind. He was now just a chapter in my story, one that shaped me but didn't define me. A few weeks later, I attended a networking event for women in business leadership. Standing at a high-top table, sipping club soda, I chatted with a circle of inspiring entrepreneurs. We shared tips, laughed over war stories of deals gone south, and marveled at the resilience required to thrive. One woman, hearing hints of my history, asked, "How did you handle it emotionally, having your husband not just cheat, but publicly humiliate you?" I took a moment, swirling the ice in my glass. "It was devastating," I admitted. I felt betrayed, angry, embarrassed. But I learned that the only way out is through, facing it head-on, refusing to be a victim, and proving to myself that I deserved better. She nodded, eyes gleaming with encouragement. "That's powerful. Thanks for sharing." Before the night ended, several new contacts slipped me their cards, eager to collaborate or meet for coffee. Each time it happened, I felt a rush of gratitude that I hadn't stayed in the shadows of Austin's betrayal. I stepped into my own light instead. Months turned into a full year. My consultancy blossomed, doubling its staff. We had an office holiday party in a bright, open loft. We toasted to successes, big and small. Brooke gave a short speech about how proud she was to see us growing. I felt tears prickling, but they were tears of joy. Once everyone left, I lingered behind to tidy up. The echoes of laughter still reverberated in the space. I found myself alone, gazing around the office I'd built from scratch after losing the one I thought I'd never leave. The old heartbreak felt distant, overshadowed by a sense of triumph and peace. This was my domain, my new reality, forged from the ashes of betrayal. In a quiet moment, I wondered if Austin ever thought about how things might have been if he'd valued our partnership. If he'd recognized that my loyalty was an asset, not a hindrance. Maybe he did. Maybe he spent nights haunted by regret. But that wasn't my burden to carry. I finished tidying, grabbed my purse, and stepped out into the crisp night air. Snow flurried down in gentle swirls, dusting the sidewalk. Turning up my collar against the chill, I walked to my car. A sense of calm enveloped me like a soft blanket. This was the life I had now, a life on my terms. As I drove home, I let the radio play a cheerful tune. My thoughts drifted, feeling unburdened by what used to weigh me down. If there's one thing I hoped people understood from my story, it's that even the deepest betrayal can become a catalyst for growth. You can let it break you, or you can let it shape you into someone stronger. And that was my happy ending, if you could call it that. Not the fairy tale version with a perfect romance, but rather a hard-won peace, a sense of self-worth so sturdy that no one could easily shake it. I had a company I believed in, surrounded by people who respected me. I had a future that was limitless, shaped only by my ambition and my willingness to dream. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to come out of life's trials with a clearer vision of who we are, and the courage to rewrite the script when the old one no longer serves us. Betrayal may have set me on this path, but it was my choice to walk it. And I walked it with my head high, a faint smile on my lips, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. So, to anyone who's ever stood in a room while their spouse introduced someone else as their replacement, or who's ever faced that moment of public ruthless humiliation, I say this: maybe the best revenge isn't destruction. Maybe it's simply becoming someone who doesn't need revenge at all, someone who can move forward, build anew, and never let anyone else define their worth. That was my revenge. And it was the sweetest victory I could have imagined.